I want to tell you about something a colleague said to me this week because it's really been sitting heavy on my heart ever since. At a meeting of regional clergy, a priest from one of our sister parishes shared that her wife, also a priest, is away on retreat right now. She said that she was glad for her spouse who's taking this time, and yet realized she too needs a retreat. And then she paused and said with startling clarity, I just noticed this pervasive tiredness in me that I can't shake. There it was, named out loud, exactly how I had been feeling. A pervasive tiredness that I just can't shake. And I know I'm not alone. Am I? Thank you. Thank you. There's the normal tiredness that comes with doing this work, but this is different. This is spiritual weariness, a kind of soul exhaustion that settles in after too much heartache, too much injustice, too much bad news, too many reasons to lament what it is like to live in the United States right now, to lament what it is like to be Washingtonians right now. And I know it's not just clergy who are feeling this way. This pervasive tiredness, this sense of being stretched thin has settled on so many of us, and for good reason. I had this sermon pretty much written by Friday afternoon before taking a quick break ahead of the Friday night film screening here at church. And then I got a call from my partner asking if I'd seen what had happened in the Oval Office. Well, I was busy writing my sermon. I said, no, what happened? It's like, you just have to look it up. And I also had mostly written this sermon before yesterday evening when I saw a post on an adoptive parents group. A mom shared that her 20-year-old Colombian adopted son had been caught up in an ICE raid at a Latino barbershop in the Boston area. And had his mom not answered her phone when he called frantically, and had she not had on hand photos of his citizenship documentation ready to text to him, the officers were about to detain him. They didn't believe him when he told them that he was adopted. So over dinner last night, my family got out all of our vital documents, and our sons took photos of their certificates of citizenship, just in case. I don't say all this to make you uncomfortable. I say it because this is where we have to start if we're going to find any gospel truth in today's texts. As when we come to the story of Jesus' transfiguration, the bright cloud, the shining glory, the voice from heaven, I found myself thinking this week, that sounds lovely. But who even has the energy to climb a mountain right now? This shimmering, mystical moment we call the Transfiguration, it feels a little out of reach today. Because to even get to Transfiguration, you have to climb the mountain. And climbing feels like a tall order when you're already carrying too much. Grief, fear, compassion fatigue, anger, exhaustion at trying to stay faithful in a world that won't stop unraveling. And this isn't my first time preaching about the Transfiguration. It shows up in the lectionary every year. And so this week, when I was struggling with what the Spirit might be saying, I went back and reread my own sermons. And I saw familiar threads, things I still believe are true. I've preached to you about how Peter wanted to contain the mystical experience by building those 3 tents for Moses, Jesus, and Elijah. That's always so weird. And how Peter missed the point in doing that the mountaintop isn't the point. The mission is the point. We've talked about how God's glory doesn't stay locked up in the clouds, that Jesus then led Peter, James, and John back down the mountain into the valley of the real hard work of discipleship. And at the same time, another year I've preached that mountaintop moments matter, that we need moments of glory, wonder, and awe. But what use are they if they don't then transform us into people who act differently because of them? And I still believe all these things that I've preached before. But this week, as I reread them, including one that was from 2017, when we were responding to other things of injustice, I realized I wasn't this tired as I am now when I preached those sermons then. And it made me wonder, what does Transfiguration have to say to a community that is already so weary? What does glory mean to people who feel like they never made it up the mountain to begin with? And that's what sends me back to Luke's text today. Not just looking at things that we've noticed in this familiar story before, but listening for what the Spirit is saying to us now. And what I'm hearing this year is noticing something that's distinct in Luke's version. And it's hidden right in the reason why they went up the mountain in the first place. Luke tells us, plain and simple, Jesus went up the mountain to pray. This whole dazzling scene starts with prayer, with Jesus seeking communion with the one who sent him. And it was while he was praying that the appearance of his face changed and his clothes became bright as lightning. And then in the middle of all that glory, Moses and Elijah appear. But notice what they talked about, a detail in Luke that isn't in Matthew and Mark. They weren't talking about Jesus' greatest hits so far, all the miracles he'd performed. They weren't even talking about the prophets' glory days. They were talking about what was to come, about Jesus' departure, his exodus, the hard road ahead. I can just imagine Moses giving Jesus some tips, firsthand experience of what it's like to try and lead an exodus. So for Peter, James, and John, the glory they glimpse on the mountaintop isn't some prize for good behavior. They haven't won the Best Disciple Award. It's provision. It's sustenance for the work ahead. The mountaintop doesn't exist to shield them from reality. It exists to prepare them to face it, to walk back down into a world that still doesn't know how to love its neighbors, to walk back down into a world that still doesn't know how to beat swords into plowshares, still doesn't know what to do with a God who would rather suffer for us than dominate us, still doesn't know a God desires mercy, not sacrifice. This is what I hear the Spirit saying to us today. Glory isn't a refuge from the world's pain. It's fuel for the faithful love within it. And when we're tired, when we're carrying grief and fear and anger, this is actually very good news. Because it means you don't have to climb the mountain to find God's glory. God's glory comes down to find you. But here's where we need to be careful, because I know many people have told me as a priest over my time here at St. Margaret's, some of you mentioned this in the very first conversations we have about why you left the church at some point in your life. And so often at the heart of the stories is this question of suffering. Why does God allow it? Does God cause it? What does the cross mean if we say God is love? And when people give voice to these questions, often the answers they've gotten in their past is what I'd call bad theology. That's why we have to pause here, because moments like this, when we talk about Jesus coming back down the mountain to go to Jerusalem, his road toward the cross, which we're about to embark on following this Lenten season, this is exactly where bad theology can sneak in if we're not careful. Like when people say, God gives us suffering so we can grow. Or Kelly Clarkson's version. What doesn't kill you makes you stronger. My family's favorite is, everything happens for a reason. Who hasn't heard these before? Let me be clear that this is not what I believe. That is not who I think God is. God does not cause suffering to teach us lessons. Full stop. Suffering is not inherently redemptive. It's just suffering. God does not break us to make us holy. Glory is not found in suffering itself. Glory is glimpsed in how God's love, presence, and grace meet us in suffering and lead us through it, sometimes even transfiguring us along the way. The suffering isn't the gift. God is. That's the whole point of incarnation, isn't it? The glory of a God who moves toward our pain by experiencing it in love firsthand, by becoming one of us. So if anyone has ever told you that God won't give you more than you can handle, I want to gently push back on that. Life will absolutely give us more than we can handle. But God will not leave us alone to handle it. The suffering isn't the gift. And if that's true, and if God doesn't send hardship to shape us, what is the gift? The gift is transfiguration. Not momentary glow, not fireworks, but slow, steady work of being changed by God's presence in our lives. My favorite hymn has been running through my head all week. Love divine, all loves excelling, and it has to be set to Heiferdal. You know it, you might. Love divine, all loves excelling, joy of heaven to earth come down. But fast forward to the end of the middle of the last verse. That's the part that's been on repeat for me. Change from glory into glory, till in heaven we take our place, till we cast our crowns before thee, lost in wonder, love, and praise. Change from glory into glory. That part, at its best, change from glory into glory. It's not just about heaven, about some future promise. And this is so Luke. It's a description of life now, what being a Christian can mean for us now, that we are being changed, not by avoiding the hard places, not by putting up blinders to the bad news, but by bringing the message of God's love, mercy, and justice with us to them. We are being changed, not by suffering itself, but by the grace that we find amid the chaos. We are being changed from one degree of glory into another, not because we've earned it, but because God is just that loving. And if you're too tired to believe that today, that's okay. Because remember the best part, if nothing else. God's glory comes to find you. It doesn't wait for you to go climb the mountain yourself. It doesn't require you to muster up your own radiance. It comes to meet you where you are, knee deep in the mess, hands trembling with grief or rage, hearts too tired to hope. And the same voice that spoke from the cloud on the mountaintop. That voice that said, "This is my son, my chosen. Listen to him." That voice is speaking to you too. And it is saying, "Yes, I see your grief. Yes, to your holy anger. Yes, I see your weariness. Yes, to your longing for justice. Yes, to your work even when it feels futile. Yes, I see the tears you shed when no one else does. Yes, to the hope you barely can hold." The voice that spoke over Jesus speaks to us too. "You are my beloved. In you I take delight." So whether you're standing tall or barely standing, whether you see glory or only darkness, whether you are revved up for action or too tired to move, God's glory will come find you. And God's yes will hold you and change you from one degree of glory into another all the way home. Amen.